Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod with Matt Edmundson with us today. He's CEO at Aurion Digital. We're going to talk about podcasting mostly today, growth hacks, life hacks as well. Matt is the CEO of Aurion and ran various businesses. He's from Liverpool, England, and cool guy altogether. If we're lucky, we're going to talk about sleep as well, which is a topic that has always been fascinating to me as a biohacker. Matt, welcome to Pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about your businesses.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, as you said, I live in Liverpool. I've lived here for 30 years, came to university here back in the 90s and chose Liverpool University for one reason and one reason only. And that was not because the course was so good or the university had such a good reputation, but because I've always been a bit of a diehard LFC fan, Liverpool Football Club fan. So I figure choosing a university based on the football team it's closest to is probably an appropriate thing to do. Seems to have paid off at least. And so, yeah, I came to university here, stayed here, set my businesses up here. We have two companies. One is an e-commerce business, and the other is like you with a podcasting business. And just loving it, man. We've got a great team here. We've got a warehouse facility here. In the corner of the warehouse, I have a little wood shop because I like doing woodworking as a bit of a hobby of mine. So I have a little wood shop in the back corner, which is it's like my safe haven. You know, when I just need a bit of peace and quiet, I go and turn on very loud woodworking machinery. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but just loving life here in Liverpool.
Right. What about your day-to-day, what it looks like in terms of where you spend your time, your energy, and what do you get out of each of these habits slash productivity and happiness inputs?
Oh, wow. So yeah, typically a day for me will depend on the day of the week. So today at the time of recording is a Monday. Monday, I'm in my home office and I'm just catching up with myself a little bit. And it used to be that I would record podcasts on a Monday and a Thursday. I now just do podcasts on a Thursday. And so Monday's a bit of a catch-up day, bit of a content creation day. We have an online membership community for our e-commerce business. I'm always creating stuff for that. Yeah, just catching up with the community and stuff like that. Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm in the warehouse in the office with the rest of the team. So we're all down there Tuesday, Wednesday. A lot of team meetings, just catching up with the guys and gals down there who are just all fantastic, and lots of conversations, lots of planning, lots of thinking. And then on a Thursday, I tend to be in the studio recording all day, just all day. Sometimes 9-10 podcasts in a day will get done. And then usually, because we deal internationally, I also work of an evening on a Monday and a Thursday. And so that means Friday, by the time I get to Friday, I'm pretty tired. So Friday, I tend not to be in the office. I'm in the wood shop, just playing around in the wood shop. Saturdays, I call those Sabbath days, are sort of a family rest day where we just don't really, I have no agenda. We just have some fun as a family. And then it all starts again on the Sunday, where I run a church. And so Sunday is definitely not a day of rest. But yeah, that's kind of what my week looks like, really. Lots of work, lots of fun, lots of time with family. Very, very diligent. Like when it comes to things like dinner, for example, I'm always at the dinner table of an evening, eating dinner with the family. Try very, very hard not to miss that. I have a date night with my wife every week. We've been married for 25 years, so that's in the diary without fail every week. So family time, you know, it comes first. And so those big things go in the diary first and we make sure that they get done. But yeah, after that, it's about working with the team, making sure everyone's on track, especially me, creating content and just talking to fantastic people.
For the podcast, what's your framework slash playbook? What questions do you ask? How do you choose your guests? And what's the lead gen aspect of it?
So yeah, as I think I mentioned before we hit the record button, I did my first podcast back in 2012. We had this, I had this e-commerce business, which I've subsequently sold, but we needed to really do something quite different with marketing. And so for whatever reason, I can't really tell you the answer to this question. I don't know why we did it. I don't know why I decided one day to set up a podcast. I just did. I thought it'd be fun. So, you know, we set this podcast up. And we started to get an audience. And it was basically three of us from the office just stood around microphones chatting about industry trends in the beauty industry. It was in the beauty sector. And what I realized was we'd been doing it a couple months, and I'd been trying to get a supply contract. You know, I was just trying to get this contract with a company to sell beauty products on my website with a certain supplier, but we were not getting anywhere. We called them, they wouldn't return my calls. I couldn't get through to the CEO, so cold calling wasn't working, emails weren't working. Letters, we just could not get through to them. They just didn't respond. They obviously had a very fixed process, and they weren't interested in me selling their products online. And we had a pretty big beauty website at the time. It wasn't like we were small. You know, we were turning over millions. And so what I just had this realization one day. I just thought I need a different way to reach this guy. I need to be able to talk to him. And so rather than calling him and saying, hey, listen, can we supply your products for the 50th time, or how many times we tried to call them? We called them up and I said, listen, we've got this podcast and we'd love to invite the CEO onto the podcast just to come and share the story and talk about your brand. I instantly get through to the CEO. The door just opens straight away. We get them on the show. I have a great conversation with him for about an hour. And by the time that conversation is finished, not only had we had a great conversation and I'd got some great stuff for our podcast, but we'd got the supply contract that we've been trying so hard to get. And that supply contract was worth over 100 grand a year to us as a business. And so it was then I realized actually with podcasting, whilst the audience is important, depending on the type of podcast you want to do, whilst the audience is important, the guest is important too. And you can use your podcast as a mechanism to invite very targeted guests onto the show, whether that's people you want to work with in terms of supply contracts, like I initially figured out, or like we also do now, we have a podcast where we invite CEOs onto the show to come talk about their businesses, about challenges they faced. And we get some great conversations going and they find out what we do. And it's a great way to connect with them. And so that's the main mechanism we use to grow our podcast agency. We just go and find people that we'd like to work with and invite them onto the show, have a chat with them and see where it goes.
And the chat's organic. You don't pre-prepare questions.
No, what we do is we don't, I'm not a big fan of prepping a whole bunch of questions beforehand, because I much prefer conversation. Like, you know, I prefer the organic aspect. I appreciate this is not for everybody. Not everybody thinks like me, but I prefer the organic nature. Now, that said, there's two questions that we have every week. And the first question is always the same question, because we've discovered that when you're working with leaders who haven't really been on podcasts before, you've got to put them at ease pretty quickly. And so the opening question is really, really important. So we have the same opening question, and we tie it into what we do as a business. And so I'll say something like, hey, Charles, as you know, this podcast is brought to you by Aurion Media, whose sole purpose in life is to help you set up and run your own podcast as a way to open doors to amazing people and have amazing conversations. And you never know where it might lead you to. So if you did have a podcast, who would be a guest on your show and why? Someone from your past or your present that's had a real influence on your life. Who would be your top of the list type person? And that's a relatively straightforward question to answer. We always prep the guests ahead of time saying that we're going to ask that question. And so what it does is first-time visitors, they come on the first-time podcasters, when they come on the show, they instantly put them at ease, because we just start having a conversation about it. There's usually a bit of banter, a bit of laughter, and that's usually quite good. And then the second question we asked is not a fixed question, but I have here on my desk something called the question box, as you can see if you're watching it on the screen. And that's just a box of random questions. And so we just randomly pull out a question and see where that takes us, because that's always quite interesting. But the rest of it's pretty organic. Just conversations about how they got started in business, things they've learned, challenges, are always in great questions, what they do to sort of recharge their batteries, and what growth looks like for them. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it.
Question for you regarding the podcast. Do you also offer it as a service? And you mentioned that this is the conversational approach is not for everyone. I definitely agree for someone that would start a podcast. I even advise my clients to use GPT to come up with these pods. But do you offer podcasting as a service? And what do you advise starters to do when they have a new pod?
We're very niche in the sense that we help business leaders, or just any kind of leader really, set up a podcast that is very focused on inviting the right guests onto the show, to talk to the right guests. And so we're not here if you want to build a big audience. We're here if you want to connect with the right guest. That said, we also work with e-com clients who want to use podcasting to grow their e-commerce business, because obviously we've got a unique insight into both. So yeah, we do offer that as a service. If you're just starting out with podcasting, the same thing I say to everybody that when we help them get set up with their podcast. Number one, be clear on the purpose of your podcast. Why are you doing this? And number two, the first 10 episodes, we always get clients to think in 10 episode blocks, think 10 episodes at a time. But we always say the first 10 episodes are going to be pretty rubbish, because you don't really know what you're doing and you're finding your feet, you feel slightly uncomfortable. And so do the first 10 episodes with people that you know, especially if you're doing the interview style podcast, people that have got a bit of grace for you, that want to see you succeed and want to help you. Do that with them. And then by the time you hit episode 10, you're starting to find your stride a little bit. By the time you've hit episode 20, you are doing more than, what is it? I can't remember the exact stat, Charles. Maybe you know, but some horrendous amount of podcasts never actually make it past episode 20. I don't know if it's like 90-some%. So if you've made it past episode 20, you're already, like way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that, Ikigai has the capitalist aspect to it. You need to make money off your pods, and a bunch of people, they get discouraged because they don't make any money or they don't find the time. Sometimes the guests are boring as well. So you need to find a way to capitalize on pods. And that's where like targeting your ICP can be a very good way of monetizing your pod. So how do you go with building these lists of their ICP, for example? And how do you soft pitch the guests? If so, is it after the podcast? Is it subscribing them to newsletter? Is it remarketing them once you spoke with them? What's your monetization strategy?
So again, I think for me, monetization is, as long as I don't think of it in very binary terms, i.e., I've invited this person onto the guest, did I make money from that, yes or no? Because there's multiple ways to monetize what's going on. So obviously, we have clients who come on the show, they're interested in the service because before they come on the show, they've clicked the links in your emails, they know a little bit about you. So they're not blind to the whole thing. And so I would say probably for most people, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 clients would be interested in your services that come onto your show if you have done your lead generation correctly. So if you've targeted the right people with your outreach campaigns, you should 1 in 3 to 1 in 5, I think should be reasonable sort of numbers. And so depending on who it is, depending on who the client is, we offer them different things. So for some people, we might just offer a free call just to brainstorm ideas with them. For some clients, we might give them access to one of our courses, all depending on where they're at. So we have this sort of conversation afterwards. Is podcasting something that they've thought about to do their own marketing and lead generation? If so, what sort of questions do they have in mind? they're subscribed to the newsletter. Obviously, we subscribe every guest to the newsletter. They get that every week. And so, yeah, we have various different ways to get them into the top of the funnel, depending on who they are. So we don't just have one way. We've tried that in the past, but I think it's a little bit too rigid because not everybody's in the same place. And then it's just all about staying in touch with them. So I follow every guest on social media. I'm always commenting on their LinkedIn posts usually. So I'll probably spend an hour or two a week just reconnecting with people on LinkedIn and commenting on their posts. And so, because again, people have very different times of purchase, don't they? So some people might be ready to buy now. Some people, it might be in a year's time. I'm just talking to a chap now, actually, who wants to start in the new year with our services. Well, he was on the podcast 9-10 months ago, right? So you've got to sort of play the long game. But also, I think you've got to be aware that other opportunities come out of it. So the classic one is last year I spoke at a big conference in Dallas, 2,000-3,000 people there, called Sub Summit. We did a live podcast recording on their stage. It was a great opportunity to meet and network people. And that happened because the founder of Sub Summit, we'd invited to come onto the podcast. And I was just chatting to him and he's like, man, you should come over and to the show and do like a live podcast on stage. I was like, that'd be awesome. And so that opportunity came out of podcasting. So he didn't buy my services, but he invited me to, come speak at his event. And that opened quite a few doors for me, and still opening quite a few doors for me. And I'm actually going back there this summer to do the same thing again. So it's not always straight out of the gate, here's my check for all your services. But you can find some very interesting ways to make money out of it.
Right. Then the e-commerce part, tell me a bit more about it because I feel you've rebranded with Aurora not so long ago. Why was that move and what do you do nowadays in e-commerce? Is it purely consulting?
No, well, yeah, okay. So we did a rebrand to Aurion, and we had this big beauty company which we sold during the pandemic a couple of years ago. And so when we sold that, we moved our warehouse. We took the time just to sort of reimagine life. What was that going to look like post company sale or post that website? And the other thing that we found during the pandemic was that there were a lot of companies that wanted to do online, but didn't have the time or the talent, didn't have the team, wasn't really sure what to do. And so we were doing more and more of the done for you service. So we get companies come to us and just going, listen, I want to do online, but I just want to outsource the whole thing. So we do everything from their website, their marketing, their fulfillment, their customer service. Everything comes through us, and we do that as a service. And so, and then on top of that, we do the coaching, we do the consulting. And so, and at the same time, I still have my own e-commerce businesses. We're just about to launch in the new year a new brand, a new skincare brand, which I'm excited about. So yeah, there's a lot going on in the e-commerce space. We've got a great team, and we do a lot, which is really good fun. Keeps it interesting. I don't want to get bored.
Yeah, I'm seeing that lots going on. How do you manage your priorities? Like, what do you need? How do you determine what is the right thing to invest your energy and your time in on a daily basis?
That's a really good question. We use here Asana, and so everything gets tracked in Asana. And I just have a simple priority list. Like, is this something I need to be working on now? Is this something I should be working on next? Or is this something that goes in what I call the backlog? So anything that's now is what I'm usually working on. That doesn't mean it's the most urgent, I remember years ago reading Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits, and he talked about the important, the non-important, the urgent, and the non-urgent, and he had this kind of matrix. And he talked about how most leaders work on what's urgent, and it could be that it's urgent but not important, or it's urgent and it is important. But the things that we rarely work on are the important parts of our business, but they're not actually that urgent, so they keep getting put further and further back. And so I make sure that my priorities aren't just firefighting, but they're actually proactively thinking about things. And so more recently, we've started now to come together as a team and work the same system, because it creates a great sense of momentum when you start, knocking some projects out. So we start focusing on specific projects. Let's work this till the end, bam, and then we'll work on the next one. And then that creates a really good sense of momentum with the team. So that tends to be how I prioritize. The big rock, medium rock, little rock analogy works super well. What's the most important things I need to do today? Let's get those scheduled in. With the remaining time, what's the next important things I need to get done today? Let's schedule those in. So just taking 10, 15 minutes at the start of the day to review it is a really powerful way for me just to make sure I'm staying on top of things.
Love it. So what would be your main priorities and main goals for 2024?
That's a very good question. So we're launching 3 new e-commerce brands in the first 6 months of 2024. So obviously we'll want to build those and get those up to reasonable turnover levels. For me, reasonable turnover is between 3 to 5 million. So we'd want to get those turnover levels pretty smart. We'll see how long it takes to get those. I reckon probably within 2 to 3 years we should be okay. I really want to get those. We've got a podcast studio, but we need to build a second podcast studio for clients. That's going to be happening the early part of next year. So there's a bit of construction work to get done. And then we just really want to grow the podcast business. We've got a really good system, really good mechanism, great team. And I think everything's in place to scale that. So yeah, we'll be scaling that probably to be about, well, targets on paper are one thing, aren't they? Reality is something different. But in our targets for next year, we're looking to be sort of around 10 times the size that we are now, without losing that aspect that makes us us. And then I think we'll reassess when we get to that point. But whether we manage all of that next year, I don't know. But yeah, fundamentally, there's some quite aggressive growth targets for next year, and we're all on track at the moment. So I'm pretty stoked. So yeah, we'll take some time off. We'll start 2024 with a whole new set of energy and see where it takes us.
And what about challenge expected? What challenges have you faced throughout your career? How have you resolved them? And do you think that these may pop up again in the near future?
Oh, I've no doubt. I mean, there's always something going to rear its head, isn't it? Something that's always going to be an obstacle, a challenge, a test, a trial. Because fundamentally, I was talking to someone about this the other night, fundamentally, we can plan, but we have no control really over life. We like to think we do, especially if we're leaders or CEOs. We think we can control things. We think we're masters of our own destiny. And to some extent, what we do impacts our future. If I eat nothing but pizza and I get obese, well, you can see that is, cause and effect in some respects. I appreciate that's not true for everybody, but for me, it would be. And so there are things that I can do to try and make next year better. But I'm very aware that there are a lot of things outside of my control because people are involved and I cannot fundamentally control people. So I've got the things in place that I think we need to, to be resilient. We've got a good team. The team has been around for a while. We've gone through lots of different things together. I think one of the best ways to deal with challenges and obstacles is actually to be brutally honest with your team, to say, this is what we're facing, this is what's going on, and get input from them. What do you think? I never feel like I have to come up with all the answers, which takes the pressure off, actually. So just being vulnerable with the team is a great way. And I think together, we're such a unique group that actually we pick each other up when we face the challenges, and somebody somewhere, has got an idea that's going to help us. And so just being strong with the team, for me, is the best way to do it. And also, making sure that I'm doing all the other things right. So I'm exercising regularly. I'm creating space so I'm not mentally stressed all the time. I'm making sure that I'm spending time with my family. I always want to succeed at home first, so making sure family life is good. And I think if I've got those foundations, then the challenges we face, and let me tell you, like everybody, we have faced some insane challenges over the years. I remember in 2012, one of the reasons we started the podcast, we were supplying a particular beauty brand on our website. We were turning over about 6 million a year at the time, which about 5 million of it was with this one particular brand, which made us one of their biggest customers in the world. And we were selling a lot of their product, and it was going great. And then we just got the letter at the start of the year. It was just a letter. It wasn't a phone call, wasn't a conversation. It was just a letter from the supplier saying, with immediate effect, we're changing our terms and conditions of supply. And this very long, dull, boring letter basically said that the more you buy, the more you pay. Well, we were buying more than most people, so we were going to end up paying just about more than everybody. And so it meant our prices went up overnight by 30%. Our sales dropped by 50% overnight. I could not control that supplier. I had no level of control over what they were going to do. I had to let people go in the business. I wondered if it was going to survive. But here we are, 10, 11 years later, and we survived. We made it, and I sold that business a few years ago. And we did that together as a team. My family life was good. My son, actually, bless him. I remember sitting the kids down saying, guys, listen, this is what's going on at work. My son was, I think, probably about 8 or 9 at the time. No, he was about 8, 7 or 8. And he'd been saving up his pocket money to buy this big Lego ship, right? One of the sort of the Battlestar Destroyer Lego ships. It was like £300 to buy it. It was not cheap. And I'd said to him, listen, if you save up half the money, I'll get you the other half, right? And we'll go down and buy the ship. And just before I'd got the news about the business, he'd managed to collect all his money. And so when I sat down and said, guys, listen, I don't know what's going on with the business. It could mean a lot of changes and so on and so forth. And I tried to explain it as best as I could to an 8-year-old. It's not always that straightforward. And Zach, bless him, he went upstairs and he got his money, his £300 that he'd saved, and he just gave it to me. He just said, Dad, listen, I want you to have this. I don't need it. And I just said to him, I said, Zach, you have no idea how proud I am of you right now, but let me tell you, we are going downtown and you will buy your Lego, because there's no way you're not going to buy that. And it's just really sweet of him. So when you've got that kind of family, when you've got that kind of support, you face very difficult, hard times. And I think with a little bit of love and a little bit of faith, you can just about get through anything.
What a story. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, just head over to the website, mattedmundson.com, EDMUNDSON. But yeah, mattedmundson.com's got all the links.
And I'm Charles Cormier, another founder, wisdompodcast.com with Matt Edmundson. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the flip side.